You hear this? This is me shaking my cardio miracle. I love it. I know you've heard me talk about it a lot. They're a sponsor for this show, Cardio Miracle. In my recovery process for my knee replacement, so I did what the doctors said. I cut it off, I think 4 or 5 days ahead of surgery. They just said no supplements, I didn't want to argue with them. Okay, fine. So I did that. And then I went home and they said you can assume everything else right after that. So I started back on my cardio miracle. I really missed it. And I can see perhaps why for surgeries. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving any medical advice. Always, check with who you trust, before, you take supplements or do anything. But it's a well-known fact now that nitric oxide is critical in getting oxygen to the blood, which then when you have oxygen in the blood acts as a conduit for healing, for energy, for all kinds of things. And so the formula in Cardio Miracle creates the nitric oxide, and there's studies. You can go on their website, you can check it all out. But I really feel that it's helped in my recovery process, and I've had a few. I don't know what my problem is. I've had surgeries. I had a hernia operation before this, and before that I had my ankle shattered. And I've had other knee replacements, but since Cardio Miracle, I've had my ankle surgery that was, I think it was miraculous how well I healed there. And then I had my hernia operation, both kind of in the groin area and my belly button. I got a twofer for that. That's getting old is not for the faint of heart. And now this knee replacement. So check it out. I'll put a link. It's a different. I've talked about this link before, but it's different than my old link to get a discount. But it just shoots you right to there. And I'll put that link in the comment section. I'll pin it. So Cardio Miracle. And I'm on some medications as a result, blood thinning, just stuff, and I am on occasional, especially after therapy, a serious narcotic pain med. I try not to take those too much, but it does make my throat kind of dry. And I'll be looking forward to getting off that stuff. But I'm also mindful that pain needs to be managed, or you can't get your range of motion and all that stuff back. So I'll be taking a little swallows here and there. I apologize for that. I know that's a bit obnoxious. Okay, let's get into this. Sue came up with this. She didn't come up with it. She made me aware of this really interesting article. It's from a paper, probably an online paper called Utah Stories, and the voice of local Utah. And there's this interesting article. It's called Shoeboxes of Cash, LDS Aid for Ogden Synagogue Fire. I had no idea about this. And this article is dated May 29th, so just recently here. So I'm going to read this article. It's really interesting. So I'm quoting from this article. Early one dark morning in December of 1989, I learned that there had been a catastrophic fire at my synagogue, Congregation Brith Shalom in Ogden. The police report stated that it was a case of arson. 2 unidentified men had broken into the sanctuary and set it ablaze. The Holy Ark, which contained our 2 Torah scrolls, appeared to have been specifically targeted. No one was ever caught, nor did any person or group claim credit for the fire. Our tight-knit community was terribly distraught and fearful that it was an act of anti-Semitism. You think? Yeah. And we can really relate. This was 1989, mind you, but we can relate to that and what's going on throughout our country today and throughout the world. Okay, I'll continue to quote from the article. While the building walls remained intact, suffering only minimal damage, its interior was badly destroyed. We worried about how and when we could begin to repair the synagogue. I had been a member of its board of directors, but was no longer serving on it at that time. The Tachmans, another Jewish family, lived right across the street from us. Cindy, the mom, was on the board. I probably butchered that name. I apologize. A few days after the fire, she stopped by to give us an update. She said that our congregation's president, Steve Haas, had received a call from an official in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints offering to help with the reconstruction, financially and otherwise. But Steve turned down the church's offer, believing that our insurance coverage was sufficient to handle the repairs. Yet Cindy was an interior designer and knew it was unlikely that our insurance would cover the costs. Yeah, since when have we ever had insurance actually cover the costs of things? I shouldn't say that. That's kind of cynical on my part. I apologize. But just from past experience, right? Okay, back to quoting. I asked if she knew who in the church had made the call, saying that if Steve didn't mind, I would be happy to get back to him and revisit the issue. Cindy found out that the man who called was Reed Smoot. And you can look up Reed Smoot, and that name is huge in church history, but Reed Smoot. Before calling, I learned that he was a direct descendant of one of the church's most significant leaders, Brother Reed Smoot, who was a United States Senator from Utah for 30 years. I was able to get in touch with Elder Smoot, who was both gracious and understanding when I explained that we could indeed use the church's help. A recalculation had revealed that our insurance might only cover half of the expenses, which was estimated to be about $50,000. Can you imagine? Okay, I'm back to my commentary. $50,000 to rebuild. That would probably be hundreds of thousands of dollars today, just showing how inflation has just devalued our dollar, its worth. But anyway, $50,000. Elder Smoot responded that he would investigate the matter, determine the best way to help us, and would get back to me as soon as he could. The congregation began to plan for the renovation. The entire interior had to be replaced. This included a new ark, seating, inside wall surfaces, chairs, lighting, windows. Cindy and the renovation committee created plans for the remodel and reached out to my wife, Linda, to design the glasswork for the windows and the ark. Many members of the congregation took home small items like candlesticks and menorahs, polishing them before returning to the renovated synagogue, or shul synagogue. After a few months, I received a call from Elder Smoot. He said that the church had something for us and asked if it would be okay to stop by the synagogue to bring it over. A time was arranged to meet with them. This is really funny. You gotta hear this. At the appointed hour, we stood by its entrance, and three white Lincoln Continentals drove up. Several couples emerged from the cars. Elder Smoot introduced himself and the others. After a brief chat, asked us to join together at the trunk of his car. It was stuffed with dozens of shoeboxes, each holding thick stacks of cash. I love this. Some even had coins. He opened the trunk of the other cars, each one similarly jam-packed. Elder Smoot then told us how this came to be. Church leaders decided to inform each of their individual congregations or wards in northern Utah about the plight of their Jewish neighbors. I get a bit choked up about this because it's so cool. It just seems like the way it should be, right? They asked each congregant to consider making a donation to support the synagogue's renovation and proceeded to pass around a shoebox. The fruits of their efforts were now in the trunks of their cars. They had collected about $40,000. We were awestruck by the nature of this outstanding gift as well as the amount. After we expressed our deep gratitude and showed them how the renovation was going, the leaders left. About 2 months later, I received a call from another church leader, Elder Stephen Nadald, I'll spell that, N-A-D-A-U-L-D, Nadald, who had recently been president of Weber State University and was now working for the church. He informed me that more donations had come in and asked if he could drop them off. Once again, we were stunned to receive approximately another $30,000 in shoeboxes. This astounding gift had a profound impact on our congregation's finances. The substantial sum not only allowed us to nicely complete the renovation, but it also provided support for other activities such as offering scholarships to Jewish summer camps. Moreover, it was truly heartwarming to be the recipient of such kindness and generosity from so many throughout our region. This expression of support did a lot to ease the pain caused by the devastation of our temple, leaving an indelible memory for all. So it's just so beautiful. So there's a picture of it, the congregation Brith Shalom in Ogden. Anyway, I thought you'd be interested in that story. I was so interested. It just was so good. And especially at a time that we're going through right now, and to hear the goodness of people, and also that it was our people. And when I say our, I mean members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that stood up to this and stood up to the plate. And I just love it. Now, let me see here. Yeah, okay. So along those lines, when I was stake president in Park City, we had a young lady, and I actually had been her bishop in the YSA ward, and she decided to go on a mission. I was now the stake president, and she's just beautiful, but she had one eye that turned directly in, and it was a huge distraction. I won't lie. You couldn't stop looking at it, kind of thing. And she had this desire to go on a mission. We got all of her paperwork. Now, her family background was very unique. Her parents had apostatized from the church, and so she alone. But she had some amazing relatives and backup and people that were just so they were just humble, dedicated saints that wanted to help her and support her on her mission. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but let's just say they gave till it hurt to help support her. So she gets called, and I could be wrong, but it was in the Midwest, Chicago maybe. She gets her mission call, and she goes there. Immediately, her mission president sees her, and he'd probably had pictures of her, and he said, we might be able to help you with your eye. And she's like, what? And he said, my brother is a surgeon, and he's one of the few in this country that knows how to correct this. And it's a cutting of muscles in the eye and, doing certain things. It's very, very specialized, let's say. And she, sorry, I'm just a little distracted here because I need to find something here really quick. There it is. Okay. So her mission president says, my brother is in a neighboring state. It's outside of our mission. But I want to just see if we can, pull this off and see if we can help you. So I received a phone call from the mission president. He kind of told me what was going on, and I said, well, man, this would be so great. What a blessing for this awesome sister. So I can't remember how much time went by, not long. I get a phone call from the mission president, and he said, I have permission from the mission department to let Sister so-and-so leave our mission. We'll cover that and get her to my brother. My brother's agreed to do the surgery for free, but the hospital costs are going to be a bit substantial. And we're wondering if you guys can cover that. And I didn't even hesitate. I just said, absolutely, absolutely, we'll figure it out. And so I can't remember when I got that phone call, but it was right before Sunday. So Friday or Saturday, I got that phone call, and then Sunday morning early, like really early in the morning, we had a meeting. It was a stake presidency with our high council, and I had the amount of money that we needed, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to bring it up to our high council. I'm just going to bring it up to the high council and see where it goes. And I brought it up to the high council, the cost. And I said, just think about it. Think what you could contribute. Think what we could do with our wards and see how we could, come about with this. Before that meeting was over, we had we had the funds. We had the funds. The surgery was a complete success. She completed her mission honorably, awesomely, and came home, and she was stunning. I just tell you, it was so cool. I'd actually, if anybody knows who I'm talking about from what I've said, if you could put it in the comments some way, I'll share my email with you, whatever. I would really like to find out how this good sister is. Okay, another article. I'm going to change gears here, and this one won't be a tearjerker, I promise you. This was in the Salt Lake Tribune. Now, the Salt Lake Tribune has been an anti-Mormon, I know we don't say that, an anti-paper against the church for forever. And even though it's softened a bit, it's still there big time. And so there was this article just a day or two ago, and it's a book that's about Joseph Smith, and it's by Jana Reese, R-I-E-S-S. Jana, R-I-E-S-S. I'm just going to say Reese. This might be Rice. But she did one on Brigham Young, very anti, really. And now this is Joseph Smith. And right off the bat, we have the title of this. So the person that wrote the article in the Tribune is interviewing the author, okay? And the headline says, yes, LDS founder Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. And this is, Jana Reese is I'm sorry. She is the she's the author of the article. Okay, she's the reporter. So the historian is John Turner, and he's the one that wrote the book about Brigham Young. I apologize for that. So John Turner, and then there's this: the evidence for Joseph's polygamy. I'm quoting now. Polygamous sealings is pretty overwhelming, says historian John Turner, who penned a new biography of the religious leader. And wait till you hear the name of this book. So this is by Jana Reese, the article. It was also on May 29th and Salt Lake Tribune. And I'm going to start quoting that. When John Turner's biography of Brigham Young was published more than a decade ago, I marveled at his skill in dealing with a very complex historical subject fairly. He sifted through a mountain of evidence, much of it conflicting, and assessed it in a way that was balanced but also maintained a consistent point of view for the reader. The book let us know what Turner thought after weighing all the evidence, but without being driven by any kind of agenda. Yeah, whatever. That last part was me. Okay, back to quoting. So it's not surprising that Turner's done it again, only with an even more complex biographical subject, Joseph Smith Jr., the founding prophet of Mormonism. As someone who has never been a Latter-day Saint, he is Presbyterian, Turner is perhaps freer to bracket the central question that plagues current and former Mormons, namely, was Joseph Smith a true prophet? Was he legit? And focus on the story of his life and times. And what a story it is. We're going to get to the title of the book. Wait till you hear this. Okay, back to quoting. In our May 19th Zoom interview, we covered far more ground than I can include here. There's a ton of interesting material in the new book called Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet. The rise and fall. Seriously? Okay, so all you know right off the bat that this is an anti-Joseph Smith, anti-Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Back to quoting. So the Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet, which comes out in June from Yale University Press. I focused the conversation on some controversial aspects of Smith's legacy, including the question so many are asking these days, did he really practice plural marriage? Okay. So this interview has been edited for length and clarity. This is what it says. So I'll tell you when it's the interviewer speaking and then the interviewee or the author. So in the book's opener, you point out. So this is the interviewer. In the book's opener, you point out that Smith was beloved by most who knew him, that he was a generous man with a great sense of humor. You also say on that same page that he had flaws and that I wouldn't trust him with my money, my wife, or my daughter. So here's what the author said. A lot of people have created this binary choice between Joseph Smith as a true prophet of the last dispensation of the fullness of times or a fraud and a scoundrel. I'm willing to see him as a little bit of both. So you know where this book's going, right? You know where this book's going. Okay, back to quoting the author again. Let's just start with the money. Joseph Smith wasn't good with money. I don't mean he was swindling people, because people who share his vision of Zion community give their resources to it willingly. And they got it, and they got a lot out of it. But Joseph's terrible with money. In Kirtland, he accrues a massive amount of debt to build the temple, sometimes in his own name, sometimes with others. Then there's the debacle of the bank failure. The net result is that he has to flee Kirtland. This leads to a fire sale of his property and church property. It's a complete financial disaster. He vows at the time, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to steer clear of debt. But once he's able to escape from imprisonment and legal challenges in Missouri, he basically does it again, going into large amounts of debt, purchasing property in Nauvoo, and he applies for bankruptcy. So I wouldn't want him to manage my congregation's finances. It would make me more inclined to give. It wouldn't make me more inclined to give. Okay, so here's the question, another question by the interviewer. As to not trusting him with your wife or daughter, and then here's his answer. Joseph pursues plural marriage so recklessly, regardless of whether one accepts plural marriage as divinely instituted principle for that time and place or not. Joseph goes about it with a disregard for existing human relationships on earth. He proposes to the wives of some of his followers, including some close followers. Excuse me. He proposes to Sidney Rigdon's daughter. Even Brigham Young was worried Joseph Smith was going to take his wife. Excuse me. Interviewer: that was an interesting story you recounted of Brigham Young having a nightmare about seeing his first wife being driven off in a carriage with Joseph Smith. Yeah, this is the author. Yeah, of course, I'm interpreting the dream. Brigham's not on record saying, I'm worried that Joseph is going to ask for my wife as an Abrahamic sacrifice. It's not very subtle, though. No, I don't think it is subtle. If I were a close associate of Joseph in 1842 or 1843, I really would have been on edge. I probably would have been thrilled at some of the other ideas and rituals that he was unveiling during those years, but I wouldn't necessarily trust him. Can you believe this guy? Okay, now another question from the interviewer. Recently, we've seen a rise in what some scholars are calling polygamy denial. So, okay, I'm commenting now. So this would be Brian Hales, he's not really a scholar, but all the people that work with him and then those that are, putting out the essays on the church website. So people who don't believe Joseph Smith preached or practiced polygamy they're labeled polygamy deniers. And I've heard Brian Hales, Greg Madsen, Jacob Hansen, these are YouTuber guys. They're all on board with this. Saying this. So I'll ask. So the interviewer asks that question again, and I'll read it. Recently, we've seen a rise in what scholars are calling polygamy denial, with some Latter-day Saints now claiming Joseph never practiced polygamy, or at least not sexual polygamy. What do you think? And then here we go. Here's his response. The evidence for Joseph's polygamous sealings is pretty overwhelming. It's true that now listen to this. It's true that a lot of the evidence is retrospective in the form of affidavits, or court testimony from many decades later. But there are some persuasive pieces of evidence from the 1840s. Now get this. The William Clayton Journal is a very exhaustive account of Joseph's plural marriages. And this is the one journal that nobody has access to yet. Okay. Joseph Smith's own and Joseph's own and his promotion of marriages of others. There's the revelation on marriage itself, and while it's true that you can't necessarily trace the extant copies of those documents to 1843, the sum total of evidence is simply overwhelming. This is the exact argument that Brian C. Hales gives. So here's a guy putting out an anti-Mormon, anti-Joseph Smith book and agrees perfectly with Brian C. Hales. This is what is so creepy about all this. Okay. A question by the interviewer. Tune in to this 2024 Mormon Land podcast in which scholars discuss Joseph Smith's polygamy, including what the evidences show and why it matters. And then the author goes on. And there's a lot of corroborating evidence in Joseph's own journals and journals of his associates. I think it boggles the mind to presume Brigham Young introduced polygamy after Joseph's death, and then so many people conspired in such incredibly clever ways to corroborate Joseph's polygamy. So why do you think some Latter-day Saints, so here's the question, are so determined to absolve Joseph Smith of involvement in polygamy? Some of this has come up in my research on Mormon faith crisis, with people very much wanting to maintain Joseph Smith on a pedestal. I don't think, that bothers me, because I don't think anyone puts Joseph Smith on a pedestal. We know weaknesses of man and people, but he never did anything to disqualify him as the prophet. And it's so interesting how desperate guys like Brian C. Hales and others are. So they're so desperate to tie Joseph to this in order to validate every prophet, and including, Brigham Young. And by validate, I have no problem of Brigham having issues with this. I have no problem with it. And he's still the key holder in the problem. The Lord works through people, imperfect people, and I'm one of them. And it's just how thing is, but then he fixes it. And he so okay, let's get back to this. Okay, so that question was Joseph Smith. So why do you think some Latter-day Saints are so determined to absolve Joseph Smith? Okay. And then here's his answer. Joseph's activities in terms of plural marriage is very uncomfortable material. He pursues it so assiduously, in my opinion, recklessly, in ways that were very hurtful to his wife, Emma. I mean, Emma Smith clearly understands this as a moral betrayal. And then here's a question from the interviewer. You have a poignant moment in the biography where Joseph finally tells Emma about polygamy, but he spiritualizes it. She consents in a limited way and says she wants to have some control over the people he's going to be bringing into their family. So she selects 4 young women who've already been living in their household, not knowing they are already married to her husband. And then the author says, yeah, it's just heartbreaking. I want to say there are a lot of times at which I admire Joseph Smith. I really think for most ordinary human subjects he might write about, we're going to come away with a mixture of admiration and repulsion. But there are several moments in Joseph Smith's life where I do think he is just callous or cruel towards others. I certainly don't think that's the sum total of his character, but his treatment of Emma is really, really callous. Even once he decides to tell Emma, he still doesn't tell her the half of it. And of course, that just gets the stage for intense conflict with her over the next several months. What I think is remarkable is that they ultimately find a way to transcend that. We don't know all the details. Duh. Joseph doesn't abandon plural marriage, but she at least puts the brakes on it to a substantial extent. And their marriage does seem more stable and harmonious over the last 6 to 8 months of his life. It goes on. I'm not going to read the rest of it because it's... actually, I'll read it. It's not that much more. Here's a question. I think this is the last question. You mentioned there are things you admire about Joseph. What are some of those? One thing that often gets lost is that Joseph had the capacity of mirth, for joy and humor and playfulness. Because scholars tend to get stuck into theological or ecclesiastical debates about him, they tend to get lost. Whether it was a treasure hunting or the story of plates and some other harrowing flights through the woods from his enemies, I think he just loved it, and he could have fun with it. His life story is so remarkable and so fun at many points. I think scholars shouldn't lose sight of that. And then listen to who he quotes. Historian Richard Bushman had this very fair complaint that no one is taking Joseph Smith seriously outside of the Mormons. I definitely think, as a non-Latter-day Saint, I want to take him seriously. I find his ideas and activities arresting and potent. But I also don't want to strip all the fun out of his story. He was so sociable and convivial. If you showed up at his door, he'd feed you. He'd give you somewhere to sleep. He'd talk to you all night and be happy to wrestle or play some other games with you. I also admire the creativity of his religious mind. Not a lot of people are willing to always be going into new directions, introducing new ideas and new rituals. always asking new questions about the Bible and finding really creative answers to those questions. For me, that was one of the really striking things about Joseph. So much of his religious leadership is steeped in the Bible and his perplexing gaps and contradictions. He's willing to ask questions about them, but then also, unlike almost anybody else could do, he could propose solutions. And so that's it. That's the end of it. So let me know in the comments what you think about that. So here, this anti-Mormon, anti-Joseph Smith is right in line with many scholars from CES, BYU, and of course Brian Hales. Okay, let's end on a positive note. I know I come off sometimes as a one-trick pony, and I get that. But this scripture in our Come Follow Me really just hit me. And you know how I feel about the cross and the suffering of Christ on the cross versus the garden, not diminishing the garden in a preparation point. But this really, and this is said over and over again in the Doctrine and Covenants. So, section 54, verse 1. Behold, thus saith the Lord, even Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, even he who was crucified for the sins of the world. Crucified for the sins of the world. That, my friends, is the Lord himself making that statement, that the crucifixion was for the sins of the world, not the Garden of Gethsemane. We don't hear about that, about the garden at all. In fact, there's another one I just thought of in our reading there, if I can find it here real quick, that I think is, it's also, it just brings up another point about the garden and the cross. This is section 56, verse 2. And he that will not take up his cross and follow me and keep my commandments, the same shall not be saved. It's interesting that he didn't say, and he that will not take up his garden. It was the cross. It's the cross. Okay, now that I want to end on this one, I have one more thing to read, and then we'll end this. I've mentioned this before, but when Sue and I went to the mission leadership, the MTC for mission presidents and wives and mission leaders, this would be in 2015. Then Elder Nelson was the apostle over missionary work. And he got up and we pulled out, if you're watching this, I have my little white handbook as a mission that I had as a mission president, signed by Thomas S. Monson, probably auto pen. We're hearing a lot about auto pens now, aren't we? With our past president of our country. But anyway, he said, pull out your white handbook and go to page 7. Now, the white handbooks might be different now, but so ours page 7. And he goes, go down towards the end of the page. And he goes, I don't know who printed this, but they left out the most important part of the quote. And he goes, I want you to have that quote. And I want to read it to you because he goes, whoever did this made a huge mistake. So here he is calling out whoever printed the handbooks for missionaries, which I thought was pretty cool. So here's how it reads in the handbook. This is a quote by Brigham Young. So we're going to end on a good point, a good tone note with Brigham Young. President Brigham Young taught, if you go on a mission to preach the gospel with lightness and frivolity in your hearts, looking for this and that, and to learn what is in the world, you will go and return in vain. And then it says, let your minds be centered on your missions. And then Elder Nelson said, erase that line and I'll give you the full quote. And I since printed it out. And he goes, this is what should have been in the White Handbook. And so now I'm going to read the full quote by Brigham Young. And this actually ties into the cross, and we'll finish here. So here's the quote. If you go on your mission to preach the gospel with lightness and frivolity in your hearts, looking for this and that, and to learn what is in the world, and not having your minds riveted, yes, I may say riveted on the cross of Christ, you will go and return in vain. Go forth weeping, bearing precious seed, full of the power of God, and full of faith to heal the sick, even by the touch of your hand, rebuking and casting out foul spirits, and causing the poor among men to rejoice, and you will return bringing your sheaves with you. Let your minds be centered on your missions and labor earnestly to bring souls to Christ. Why would they leave that out? That is your minds riveted on the cross, because that is where it happened. And there's no getting out of it. He came out of the garden. But the cross is where his life ended. That's where it happened. And that's where our minds need to be riveted on the cross. That's a quote by Brigham Young. I know some of my listeners here don't like Brigham Young. I love the man. I think he was off track with the polygamy. But I study Old Testament. I see my own life. I see my own imperfections. And I just go, well, the Lord allows agency. He works through these guys. These men, I shouldn't say these guys. These men, they're ordained. Life goes on. I look at a church that put forth the Book of Mormon and has put millions of copies in the hands of people. And that's the church I belong to. And that's the Lord's, that's the kingdom of God on earth. So I'm okay with all that. But I can also acknowledge that my belief is that Joseph Smith did not preach or practice polygamy. And we don't need to play that game anymore and agree with the apostates. It's just sickening to me. But I also want to acknowledge the goodness of what Brigham Young did, and I wanted to end on that note. So with that, God bless. We will talk to you very soon. And thank you for your love and support. Please comment. Please share if you feel like it's worth sharing. And we'll go onward and upward. God bless. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.